A vegan world. No meat, fish, dairy, or eggs. Now I know, but bear with me because there are many reasons why we need to move as quickly as possible towards a vegan world. You've got health, environment, animal rights. We vegans are always going on about these, and I will too, but I'll also address three more: human rights, economics, and antibiotic resistance. So number one, health. Every single nutrient and vitamin that we need, we can get from a vegan diet. Not one of them is synthesized inside the body of an animal. So vitamin B12 comes from bacteria in soil. Omega-3 DHA fatty acids come not from oily fish, not originally, they come from algae. So we can be perfectly healthy without any animal products. In fact, we can thrive. So there are so many vegan athletes now at the top of their game. You've got Venus and Serena Williams, Lewis Hamilton, all vegans. You've got Arnold Schwarzenegger now advocating a vegan diet. So they exist across the board. My favorite example though is that the only US weightlifter to qualify for the 2016 Olympics was a guy called Kendrick Farris, and he was a vegan, an incredible athlete. So it can take us to the top of our game, but the most important takeaway is not that from the health aspect. It is that we can be healthy on a vegan diet. NHS and the British and American Dietetics Associations, the largest, most reputable sources I can find, all say that we can be healthy at all stages of life on a vegan diet. And if so, then animal agriculture is not necessary. So keep that in mind, that it's not necessary. As we move on to number two, environment. In 2017, the University of Oxford finished a 6-year-long study, the most thorough of its kind into agriculture, analyzing over 40,000 farms in 109 countries. And it found that 83% of agricultural land is devoted to animal agriculture, and it produces only 18% of the world's calories. So 83% of land, of agricultural land, for only 18% of calories. They in turn calculated that if the world went vegan, then we could reduce the amount of agricultural land we use by 75%. Does anyone know what sort of area 75% of agricultural land is equivalent to, say, compared to a country? Any guesses?
North America?
The continent of Africa, so even bigger. So the continent of Africa, if the world went vegan, we could give back to forests and rainforests. It's this huge demand for space that's the reason that animal agriculture is the leading cause of species extinction and habitat destruction, and it is avoidable. Now onto emissions. The UN released a report showing that animal agriculture releases more emissions in CO2 equivalents than the entire transport sector. Every single train, plane, car, and ship, etc. combined, a devastating amount. And it's far more easy to avoid animal products than it is to avoid transport, and it'll do more. In terms of fish, every year we drag out of the oceans 2.7 trillion fish, 2.7 thousand billion. Environmental scientists are estimating that by 2048 we'll have eradicated the ocean's fish stocks with population growth. We won't be proud of ourselves then. So animal agriculture is devastating our forests, our seas, and our skies, and it's entirely avoidable. Number three, animal rights. 87% of the more than 1 billion animals we rear for slaughter in this country every year, we do so via intensive factory farms. And there are very few people who try to argue with sincerity that these are in any way a moral place to put sentient beings. But this is not only an animal rights violation, this is also a human rights violation, number 4. Because slaughterhouse workers are low-paid, often immigrant workers who don't want to be working there, who should be working in clean factories with crops where they won't get PTSD, instead of an environment steeped in the blood and feces and surrounded by the stench of fear from innocent animals who didn't want to be killed. Killed by people who didn't want to kill them. Suffering together, avoidably, by our choices. Number 5, economics. What has that got to do with anything? So what animal agriculture is getting a huge amount of food and turning it into far less food. This luxurious process is tremendously inefficient. As such, demands huge amounts of subsidization to be in any way affordable, although deceptively so. In the UK, we spend £3 billion a year subsidising animal agriculture. Money that could be far better spent on schools and hospitals. Number 6, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Who's familiar with this problem? Anyone? Yeah, a few people? So for those who don't know, the idea is that when we overexpose harmful bacteria to the antibiotics that we use to counter them, we give said bacteria the opportunity to evolve and adapt and develop immunity to those antibiotics, rendering in the long term the antibiotics that we use useless. And it's in turn estimated that within the next few decades we might render all antibiotics useless, and we could return to a point where you could be walking through a field, cut yourself in a bramble, get an infection and die, because no longer can the antibiotics save you. But we can far more readily counter this dystopia by getting rid of animal agriculture, because more than 70% of the antibiotics we use, we pump into animals we rear for slaughter. So another very important reason. In total, 6 very important reasons as to why we need to move as quickly as possible towards a vegan world. And in light of that, I hope you'll consider a vegan diet, and I thank you for your time.